guess it's no greater honor for a teacher, for a student to ask the teacher to share in his success. So I was really humbled when he asked me to do this. And I began to think, well, what am I going to say? It's been a long time. I mean, but he's been off in California, and it's been through Facebook that we've been able to connect, and I've just enjoyed so much seeing all the art that he does. But I think I'll start out by getting to know him, or before I actually got to know him. I was 24 years old, and I hadn't, it was my first teaching job, and they hired me in July. And school was going to start in August, and they said, oh, by the way, you're going to teach this cartooning class because there's this one student. And I didn't really know that much about cartooning, so here it was, before Googling. I take a drive to Springfield, and I go to the public library in Springfield, and I start looking up anything I can. And I said, is this going to be an all-year class? And anyway, I thought, oh, I can't wait to meet this boy. He's going to be a freshman in high school. Oh, I can't wait to meet this boy. And they won a whole class made just for him. And anyway, it was a great class, and I see another one of the students right there that was in that class. Cartooning was not anything that I knew that much about, and I was so happy to develop a whole curriculum, and it was in a hurried time, but I believe it was a whole year class, and somehow we managed to put it together. I did put together a curriculum, and it was just a great time. And you were also in Art 1, and I just remember him bringing artwork almost every day, showing me, this is what I did, and I just said, you just keep at it. You just keep going. And I remember at the time I said, I don't know whether you can stay around this rural area, though. You're probably going to have to go somewhere else. And which is, I guess, one of the reasons why I stayed to be a teacher, was because I wanted to stay in the rural area. But when I found out he was out there in California, I thought, yeah, he's successful. And really, that's all I could think of to say about it, other than, I'm just honored that he would ask me to introduce him for this prestigious award.
Chuck, on behalf of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Children's Literature Festival Committee, it is our honor to honor you this evening for your contributions to children's literature. And we honor you in a special way tonight. Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much. Well, thank you. I'm going to set this right here. Oh, that's really something else. Let me get a prop. I'll be right back, because I'm an artist. Artists work visually, so I'm going to have a bit of a prop here for part of this. And you'll have to excuse me, because I am going to refer to some notes here. So, first off, I want to thank you, Debbie, for that wonderful introduction and for being such an inspiring art teacher at Norwood High School all those years ago. You can probably tell she's a dynamic teacher, full of energy and insight. And I didn't write this down, but since you mentioned that freshman Art 1 class, there was a bunch of unruly seniors taking that for an easy credit. And I was a freshman in there, and I really wanted to study art. And, she's not tall, right? And they're getting out of line. And she comes up with this 3-foot-long ruler, and she jumps up on the desk, and she pounds that down. And she says, now be quiet, and let's do our work. And they were so shocked with the energy and stuff, but she had such a passion and stuff, she could not be denied. So that's something I've carried with me. And then she mentioned creating the cartooning class. That's very true. The other story about that is my high school basketball coach didn't really quite get that and understand that, because you were really expected to take 7th-hour athletics that led into basketball practice, even though technically you couldn't start basketball practice during 7th-hour athletics. So he never quite got that, but at the end of class, me and my ink-stained hands would run down and dress out and get on the basketball court. But I'd have to say that probably my basketball playing days are behind me, but I still have ink-stained hands. So maybe I knew something back then. I would like to congratulate author Katie McBride on her award, well-deserved award this evening. So it's an honor to share this award in such great company. And my heartfelt thanks to the Laura Ingalls Wilder Children's Literature Festival Committee for this distinguished honor. Being chosen for this award for my illustration work was much unexpected to me and very humbling. As a kid raised in the Missouri Ozarks, I was encouraged by parents and teachers to chase my dreams. I was inspired by the many illustrators whose work I saw in comic books, children's books, and magazines. I soaked all that stuff up as a kid, and I was inspired to make my own artwork. So this is a full circle moment for me to come back home and celebrate my love of illustration with other rural kids like I once was. And my mom, and this is a little bit of some personal connection too. So my mom, Carol Todd, and my grandma, Lillian Smith, were both teachers here in southern Missouri. And they were both keys to me being a visual storyteller. And I'll talk more about what I mean by that as an illustrator. In my grandma's old farmhouse, and I just took a tour of the Laura Ingalls Wilder house, and that little nook with books there, it just made me feel like I was back in grandma's house. But old farmhouse, these old books, she rescued books from schools that she didn't want thrown out. So sometimes they were textbooks, history books. I soaked all that up, especially the ones that were illustrated. And she had magazines she saved. So on weekend visits, we would go there, we would scour through the books, and we would spend hours just picking out the right one. And if we were good, we got to go up and ask Grandma if we could have one of the books. Well, she never said no. And, you know, I came home with illustrated history books, science books, storybooks, and the holy grail of all would be a copy of a TV guide with an illustrated cover. Now, I learned later, my grandma didn't save the TV guides for the wonderful artwork on the covers, but she saved them because of the crossword puzzles in the back that she loved to do. And in case she needed to do research and go back before the days of Google, she had her answers there lined up. So I think that's probably why, I understood later that also that a lot of the artwork I was seeing on these TV guides, these are artists that I later studied. People like Bob Peak, Mark English, and Jack Davis were some of the ones that did artwork on there. And I realized that someone was drawing these of people that I recognized from TV, that someone could do that. So that was a light bulb that went off in me. And on one visit, I asked Grandma if I could have a TV guide cover, which I did research later and found out was a Bob Peak cover. I'm not going to date myself by saying what it was of, but it was Beretta. No one knows that show. And he had a parrot on his shoulder. Now, I don't remember if I actually got home with that book because there was a little bit of a miscommunication there. I asked Grandma if I could have this TV guide. She said, sure. So a few weeks later, I started getting a subscription in the mail to TV Guide. So I was the first grader. But I thought it was great because then I could see when all the late night horror movies came on the weekends. So, and the Laura Ingalls Wilder books bring back fond memories of my childhood from my mother. So my mom, I went to elementary school from 3rd grade to 6th grade in Skyline R2 down here in Douglas County. And we actually lived up the hill from the school on C and 76 there, a little house. And I had her in 3rd grade and 6th grade, so it was not easy being a teacher's kid. That's probably a whole nother speech. But she basically would tell me, okay, if you get in trouble at school, you're getting it twice as bad at home. Thankfully, I was a good kid, so that wasn't much of a problem. But in this, she had a combined 3rd and 4th grade class. So there's like over 40-some kids in this class, and they had a large path down the middle. And so she could teach the 3rd graders, keep the 4th graders busy with some. She had a teacher's helper, so she'd get the 3rd graders going and then get the 4th graders going. And somehow she managed all this chaos. She found things to challenge the higher learning kids and to help the ones that needed more help. And so she managed to do all that. But in the afternoons, we had a milk break with snack. And if we were good, she would sit at her desk probably because she needed to sit down for a little bit herself. And she would read a chapter from a chapter book, and we would go through all these chapter books. And I remember these Laura Ingalls Wilder books, Little House on the Prairie, and seeing the world through the lens, the eyes of a little pioneer girl is really the core of what makes me an illustrator, because researching, finding out what the world is like, understanding how things work, you know, my training in visual journalism and all this stuff is really about finding the story and telling it, and finding empathy and getting that with through other people. So her books are important in that way to me. And those, to me, the Garth Williams illustrations, those were the editions she was reading. Those are, to me, that's what these people look like. And for me, you can't make it in the world on your own. I think this is particularly true if you're in the creative, pursuing creative careers. And I'm here tonight because I stand on the shoulders of others who have encouraged me, supported, mentored me, challenged me, believed in me along the way in my journey as an illustrator and visual journalist. Thanks to my family, my wife Anita, daughter Sina and Sheridan. They have been models and mostly helpful art critics. I'll say mostly, because sometimes I'm not asking for the criticism. And thank you to my many friends, teachers, colleagues, and all those who have shown an interest in my work, and many of you here tonight, thank you for being here. And I'm going to, so I don't miss anybody, I'm going to talk about large groups of people. So all the folks from my high school years in Norwood, 1 year in Willow Springs, I regret that I didn't graduate from Norwood, but I got a wife out of the deal. And she stuck around too, so that worked out okay. I'm extremely fortunate to have studied art and design program at Missouri State University. I worked 7 years with many talented colleagues at the Springfield News-Leader, where I learned to be a visual journalist as well as an illustrator. I was fortunate to dive into the tense MFA illustration program at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. And I was fortunate to work alongside a talented team of journalists at the Contra Costa Times and Bay Area News Group back in the Bay Area. So I would like to thank my dear friend and colleague and author of the children's books I've illustrated, Gary Bogue. Gary passed away 2 years ago. I know he's here with me, enjoying this moment. He'd probably tell me, I told you, I knew it the whole time. But I'm dedicating my award to Gary Bogue tonight, without whom I would not be the illustrator of children's books and would not be here. So I should say a few remarks about Gary. So this is a picture of Gary Bogue and I at a book signing, an event that we did. We did many of these events around to school groups and civic groups and stuff around the Bay Area. And this actually is a photo from 2007 at Tony LaRussa's ARF, Animal Rescue Foundation, which was just down the street, not far from the paper we worked at. And Gary actually was part of Tony forming that thing. Gary was a columnist, animal columnist at the Contra Costa Times. That's how we started working together. But this is typical of how our collaboration, and he would often read from the book and then point to the original art. And so you could do that, and you could see the light bulbs go off on these kids. You see, wait a second, this isn't just something that happens. This is, you know, people do this kind of thing. I'll hand my prop to my indentured servant over here. Not really. She pays my bills. So I think I said Bob Petting took this photograph in 2007, and this is our book, Is That a Possum in My Backyard? And so Gary, I'll talk a little bit about Gary, collaborating with him for the books that we did for Heyday Books. I met Gary when I first started working at the paper. Our first thing together was working on a graphic on a rabies outbreak that happens, which seems kind of odd now to think about it, but he was the animal columnist and the expert on it. So he was the wildlife and pets columnist, and he had been curator of the Lindsay Wildlife Museum. And the Lindsay Wildlife Museum is one of the first places in the country that would take in injured wild animals and rehab them and really try to release them back into the wild. And some of those animals they call ambassadors now that couldn't be rescued are there for education purposes. So it's about learning and education, about getting along with nature. And, you know, they would rehab great horned owls, red-tailed hawks, foxes, snakes, and mountain lions. So Gary is a man who raised a mountain lion from a cub and trained it to go back out into the wild. And in the book, The Raccoon Next Door, he talks about seeing a scar in the mirror, and he remembers this mountain lion getting him in the face and yowling because it was upset that it hurt him. But given this background, when you have a creative partner who wrestles and rehabs mountain lions, he's kind of hard to say no to. So Gary opened up a deeper appreciation on the interactions between people and our wild neighbors. So that was sort of his mission. And he got me pulled in on his mission and adventure on these children's nature books we did together. And as a news artist at the Contra Costa Times, I would come up with full-page graphics, page infographics. John Dingler would know something about that. I learned a lot of that craft from him at the News Leader. But I thought it would be interesting to do an infographic exploring the housing shortage on urban wildlife, because we were always doing stuff about the housing shortage for people, but you're encroaching on wild areas. What is that? How does that, what animals thrive and what don't do so well in that? So my editor pitched that in a meeting, and before I knew it, Gary was at my desk, and he says, we're working on this project together. And I go, oh, we are? He says, yeah, we're working on this project together, and oh, by the way, I have an idea for a whole bunch more of these. So he was a great collaborator. And in a side note, we had a production error on one thing. Some of my newspaper colleagues would appreciate this. The proofs, we had some semicolons and some stuff in a paragraph, and the proof and everything looked fine, but when it went to the press, somehow the font didn't go, and all the punctuation fell out after all that. So 300,000 copies go out on a Sunday, and Gary was like, how did this happen? It's like, I don't know. I don't. And so he would strive to give me paragraphs without odd punctuation marks after that, because he was a problem solver. So if the technology doesn't work for you, you work with what you got. So these ended up being 7 full-page infographics, Creatures of the East Bay, and those became so popular back when they spent money on newspapers. The newspaper and education program created posters, and they distributed those around to local schools and groups. Groups would come in, and so the paper would send out these tubes of posters. And one of those posters, or maybe several of them, and I'm not sure if they were the newspaper pages or the posters, but they were hanging up in UC Berkeley, and the publisher of Heyday Books, Malcolm Margolin, is coming through one of the science buildings on the UC Berkeley campus and sees one of our graphics, and he contacts Gary, and he says, Gary, would you like to do a book? Have you thought about doing a book? I love your column. He says, well, I want to do a book, but you have to bring my illustrator along. So we did our first book, which was The Raccoon Next Door, Getting Along with Urban Wildlife, and that was more descriptions of how to solve these problems and interactions with animals in a humane way, and some of his anecdotes of some of his experiences. And so that was his writings, much like his columns, and I did black and white spot illustrations for those. So that's kind of an all-ages book. But Gary was not satisfied with one book, and neither was I. He always wanted to do children's books, so we created the kids' book. Is that an opossum in my backyard? Is that a hummingbird in my backyard? And is that a skunk? And Gary's joy was sharing his love of nature and teaching both young and old about their own wild backyards. And I have to tell you, living on a farm in Missouri, in my backyard in Concord, California, I've seen what? Cooper's hawks, raccoons, possums, all kinds of crazy stuff in my backyard. Owls, we have owls that live in a palm tree. It's crazy. And I've seen a lot of wild animals on the farms, but just because you live in an urban area doesn't mean that you aren't sharing your space. It's their home too. So I'm particularly honored that this award this evening will help our books find new audiences and can teach and inspire kids young and old. So that's very extra rewarding. I'll talk a little bit about being an illustrator. So I think the best thing about being an illustrator is that I'm always curious and constantly learning. And I told some of the groups today coming through, it's like, the best thing about being an illustrator is I'm always a student. I'm always learning. I'm always hungry to learn more. So I'm at my core, I'm a visual storyteller. And I've probably done hundreds of illustrations over the years on a whole range of topics for newspapers and other places. My job is to research, understand, and tackle subjects oftentimes that I may not know anything about. And that's actually fun and exciting. But also there's another job that you have to do. So for me, creating artwork with empathy and with an emotional content cultivates an image that rings true on a human level. So imagine how it feels, how it would feel to someone, and try to figure out what that situation would be like and how you would visually portray that. So by walking in a character's shoes, by trying to understand the world to someone else's perspective and visualizing their point of view, we have a richer, more diverse understanding of our world. And what does the world look like through the eyes of a little prairie girl? How does a family experience a stinky skunk moving into their backyard? What does the world look like to a hummingbird high in the sky where it flits and zooms about? And what does it feel like for a kid with a flashlight discovering a young possum in a trash can? Exploring the world through these different lenses and finding my own visual voice and creating these illustrations is exciting and rewarding. So what's next for me? I'm staying hungry to keep pushing and growing as an illustrator because the journey to get better is worth staying hungry to pursue. And I'm going to keep feeding my curiosity and keep learning. And tonight I would like to announce that I'm just now getting started. Isn't that exciting? Thank you.